the Dharma. But it is always the case that many of those who have then undergone first their retreat teaching training, then their rigorous philosophical training, that many of them would eventually return to some retreat situation or other in order to continue their practice. Whenever Rinpoche had the opportunity to visit these places, particularly these nunneries, in particular that one, he never failed to be amazed at the quality of the practice of the retreatants there, at the proficiency in all various aspects of meditation practice, particularly by the practitioners in these parts. Rinpoche will always be amazed at how well they are practicing.
Dubranania terida, Tatazo, Tane Lojo Lin, Tane Nimba Yo, Tane Adelumbachi Gumba, Karayena, Hundote Mayan, the Indromari, Hundote, Tangas a chewy gonna come Minjitibara, Minjeta Yabomina, shoot the Karazana Yaboyomari, Del Pachimo Boyomri, Tane Dintotila, Tin Donatine, Ta Hundote Yotop Gore, so
now, having spoken a whole lot about the wonderful nuns and the great practitioners in these nunneries, such as Gepchak and affiliated ones, it has to be mentioned clearly that the situation is not a whole lot different in the monasteries, particularly in Tsepchu Monastery, which is the main Drukpa Kagyu monastery, in Nangchen, where Adi Rinpoche used to reside, where Sato Rinpoche himself spent a very long time, and where he goes again and again. It is exactly the same situation there, actually. Whenever the monks enter the monastery at a rather young age, Adi Rinpoche used to take great care to first provide for them in every which way, to provide for them in such a way that there would not be lacking anything in the way of facilities. Because if one has any particular lack in whatever everyday facilities it is that one needs, then the study of Dharma, the practice of Dharma, etc., is indeed difficult. Now, having made sure that the outer living conditions are acceptable, that they are conducive to the study and the practice of Dharma, the monks would then undergo the regular monastic training, and when they have come of a certain age, it would be necessary for each and every of these monks, no exceptions made, to begin with their preliminary practices. So even as of a rather young age, one would not find a single monk in Tsepchu Monastery and in affiliated ones that has not practiced at least one full set of the preliminary practices of Ngondro. And after having done that, they would then proceed on to familiarize themselves further with Dharma, with practice, etc., and proceed and evolve along these lines.
다시 독강는 다 나눠주 다다 개자군티 남지면 양 독당지과 양 냠리의 당지과 단이 총콘자 하면도 총콘을 나눠주로 가라 양 가도 단이 양 총코대지야 양때 다 군가양 다시 레트소는 양 집과 집장 양 로레를 탱래 양 나지거니야 양 남지네.
After having undergone the regular the regular monastic training, which in this particular case would also entail the practice of ngondro, of the preliminary trainings, then eventually the young monks would be educated enough, would be old enough to enter the retreat center, the Drukpa. And as this is the Drukpa of Tsikkim monastery, of the Drukpa lineage, of course, the main practice that is being trained in the retreat center are the 6 doctrines of Naropa. When it comes to this practice, when it comes to this retreat center, for that matter, the setup, the arrangement would be almost exactly the same as the one that Rinpoche has described for the nunnery of Gipchak. Some of the physical exercises as practiced by male practitioners are slightly different than the ones that are being trained in by female practitioners, but apart from these rather slight differences, the entire setup, the entire sequence, etc. and so forth would be exactly the same, all the way down to the demonstration of proficiency in Tummo, in inner heat practice, by way of going out in the depths of winter, soaking your shawl in ice-cold water, wrapping yourself up in it, practicing the physical exercises, and then eventually practice Tummo to such an extent that after a whole sequence of exercises and so forth, these repeatedly shawls which were repeatedly soaked in water would then again be dry. So in this way, the monks would demonstrate their proficiency in practice in very much the same way as has been described for the nuns.
Chubari, Jambo, Kejashena, Ramando, Tanetangi Chuikoda, Tanganyam Marine, Yongsa Marine, Sansan, Yon, Teneconas, Jute Penjo, Teman Tatana, Nachigalata, Zindal, Tanape, Yabote, Zoe.
It so happens that behind the monastery of Tsepchu in Nangchen, there is a large mountain, a rocky mountain, and this mountain is known to be a particular place sacred to Guru Rinpoche or Guru Padmasambhava. It has several smaller and larger caves which are also used for retreat practice by certain practitioners, mostly for those who have undergone the requisite retreat and who would then proceed to do further practice, further retreats in these sacred environments. The tradition would be that first one would undergo the traditional 3-year retreat, and after having done that, one would undergo another 3-year retreat on which the emphasis of practices would be somewhat different. In this way, one would have done 6 or somewhat more even than the 6 years of retreat, and one would then eventually be enabled to proceed to these sacred places to train oneself further in particular practices. And these places it would also be customary that even though one has already undergone the full training, one would again train oneself in preliminary practices which would be practiced very much along the lines as the regular preliminaries are known. We would perform prostrations, one would train oneself in the repetition of the 100-syllable mantra, one would do mandala offerings, guru yoga practice, even though the numbers that one would have to accumulate would be rather smaller than what one would have to do initially when starting out with preliminary practices as a beginner. It is very clear to see that those who have undergone this rather rigorous training have indeed become, for the most part, what we can call good Dharma practitioners. They're very soft-spoken people, they're very patient people, they're free of any such emotional defilements as pride or anger or jealousy. They are generally very nice, very beautiful people to be around, in whom one can very clearly see what intensive, concerted Dharma practice can do for an individual, in which way concerted Dharma practice can transform an individual to the better.
Tata jabje adir mochi kadrenke te namjing mel te gomatam che choyore nyaning adir mochi lota sunjate ngaina khongjo te Drukpa kaji che gompa tukkenang do tinang ni ma trafasune sumde chambal chamba ni te hundo ya cha phamo tin cha tin demjo tin cha te ni ba ya chali te tani yaro tani gomkha tukkenang ta lama sumne shoso tani aden mochi da tro tani goni yoga mgram tri damga tani thongkor ja tang te nyam te lasu ba tani aden mochi ta sipchu gona ta da tro tani cheda choro tani Drukpa kaji ta khong ma yogna tani de me ni ta ti churok te nyam do sare tani te na chetang ina mamang mo nang chogo mare te ta timbal thulure timbal thosana ta nge masne la na ji yin so te kong nang ta te chachang te ta gomba rang so la ta nge che nang shana churang ke khelin ko khe malang na khong nang ne te nang chana tene churang so loksong so te yin ji men chang do go tene konang so khelang adir mo chi ta za to nang te da te ta gomba so la ta da che ta da tene da che loksong so ta churok nyang ni do ko yore.
All of this has been made possible. The very fact that these practices have been kept alive, that they have been revived to a certain extent, and that they're being continuously practiced by all of these many male and female practitioners, all of this has been made possible solely due to the kindness of Chapje Adi Rinpoche. While Adi Rinpoche was still among us, it would be his custom to every year receive the three most proficient practitioners of any monastery or nunnery which was under his direction, and give them further instructions in the very special, the very unique transmission of the 6 doctrines of Naropa as they're being passed on within the Drukpa lineage. And those who would receive these even more refined, even more in-depth instructions would be under a very strict oath or promise to go to retreat and to practice these until the signs of accomplishment in the practice have arisen within themselves. They absolutely had to promise to do this. If one of them would say, I'm rather not sure, or I think this is too much, I don't want to promise this, then he would say, very well, that's your decision, but then you cannot receive these instructions. Then someone else would be asked to come and receive these instructions. So in this way, due to the kindness, to the great kindness of Chabja Adi Rinpoche, these traditions, these lineages, these transmissions, etc., have been maintained and are being maintained even in the very present day.
yang Drukpa kareyuna yang thi damga ko yang hyochi tani adero mochi ningma vena ningma re de saja vena Drukpa vena kareyuna walong kare gogo yore te nyane hina saja gumba na wang mambo naso kaju gumba damkha gon to solo wang mambo naso adero mochi tandra mambo naso tani ta gelokte kanang thingen thoma soma to tani ningma wang kong dase wang nang tene kong tanda chin tene khedop nidin tene lamang ba ta datse shire.
Traditionally, it used to be the case that the various Adi Rinpoches also used to be the lamas, the teachers to the kings of Nangchen. And of course, even though there is no such a thing as a kingdom of Nangchen anymore nowadays for the obvious reasons, and there is no person that is officially named the king, of course the family lineage continues, and of course there still is that aristocratic family. So the one who presently would hold the title of the king of Nangchen, he accordingly also eventually came into the presence of Adi Rinpoche, and he received all of these instructions and transmissions as the previous kings of Nangchen have received them from the previous Adi Rinpoches. Not only was Adi Rinpoche a foremost lineage holder of the Drukpa Kagyu, he also was holder of all sorts of other traditions, all sorts of other schools. Sato Rinpoche himself has seen so often that masters of the Nyingma tradition or masters of the Sakya tradition or other Drukpa masters would come into the presence of Adi Rinpoche to request empowerment, to request transmission from him of whatever small, unknown, obscure teaching one could possibly dream of. Adi Rinpoche was the holder, the disseminator of all of these teachings. Sato Rinpoche says he has never himself seen any Gelugpa lamas to come to request teachings or transmissions from Adi Rinpoche, but that may simply have been coincidence. Also in these parts of the world there are few Gelugpa monasteries, few Gelugpa lamas, but where all the lamas of the other named traditions are concerned, they would all look up to Adi Rinpoche while he was alive, and he would be the sole reference for them, and they would invariably always come into his presence to request empowerment, transmission, clarification, etc. and so forth.
Gonjabgung sasatana yang nimakama yonzo tanana ya tini patun Drukpa gong yang Druklo wang chatsang nangre
Adi nimakama
nangre gonjabgung konte nata gonjabgung pingon chinze indwa pingon chinze mochi sone ta nimakama jubate ader mochi ya samandos ate chik ching naroji sunatane mananang te gonjabgung nangre.
Not only was Adi Rinpoche extremely active in this regard in the eastern parts of Tibet, He was also able to once come to Tashijong in India and to pass on all of these precious transmissions and teachings to the masters there and to the masters who particularly came to Tashijong to receive transmissions from Adi Rinpoche. At another occasion, he was able to come here to Nepal, to Tsogni Rinpoche's monastery, which is very nearby here, and he was also able to give all of these transmissions to the masters who assembled for that purpose there. And when eventually Adi Rinpoche had then returned to Tibet, he was requested by the masters of Gongjap Monastery, which is a Nyingma monastery, to give the transmission of the Nyingma Karma, which is the oral transmission of all the various Nyingma transmissions, Nyingma teachings, and Nyingma tantras, oral as opposed to the various Dharma traditions. It was His Holiness Dilgo Chense Rinpoche himself who let it be known to the Nyingma masters in these parts that in their day Adi Rinpoche was the only one who was the holder of the complete transmission, so therefore they eventually approached Adi Rinpoche, requested the transmission of the Nyingma Karma, and he was kind enough to eventually visit Gongjap Monastery and to give these transmissions of the Nyingma Karma to a vast number of masters that had assembled there for that occasion.
tel ta ndokpa kaju timba yonzo tel ta wang long tri dama da se khong te we ore ten te chat ta khong man ndokpa kaju timba dela ta yege re mina yongsa mare ningma na rin chin tan zun dos te sajala sajan dos ten ne nam ta re mina nga son ndokpa kaju timba la ta yong tu sa mare ten ta khong yege re go do so tane dar zon mo che chuja mo che tashi jong la ma khamdor mo che ta khong na da se tane jamgo kona bada se tene nang tene rupa ka ju te ta rulo chungju chimo se te pecha dragores.
It is solely due to the great kindness of Adi Rinpoche that so many of these transmissions, particularly of the Drukpa lineage, are being maintained nowadays. That he was able to pass them on to masters of the younger generation. Not only the transmissions of the Drukpa lineage, but also such transmissions as the various collected termas of the Nyingma tradition, which are collected in the Rinchen Terze, or other transmissions of the Sakha tradition. Whatever it was that Adi Rinpoche himself held, he freely passed on frequently and many times to whatever master, whatever students came along to request them. It is due to his kindness that our present Drukpa masters, starting with His Holiness the Jalwan Drukpa and Dordzong Rinpoche, Kamtra Rinpoche, Chogyam Rinpoche, and so forth, etc., that they have received the unique transmissions not only of the Drukpa lineage but also of so many others from Adi Rinpoche. In this way, he was of extreme importance, and he has shown extreme kindness to all of us in the end, by way of keeping these transmissions alive and given them to the present generation of masters who will hopefully be able to maintain them and pass them on further.
Jinghu to go Nakalayo, Tarang Zala, your dam, Nicoyo, Tane, that Tinanita, Peshate, Tani, John Sonin, which Kong, Jimda Kongos, Tani Leja, I didn't watch a Kong Mina, the letter Maris, Tani Kong Jimdas in Le Kongzo, Tani Mata, I didn't watch a Payol, Lord Nizan, Yon and Tate Jana, Lennon Yo. Lord Nindan.
Presently, it is the case that a great many of specific Drukpa lineage teachings have been republished to make sure that they do not disappear from this world, but that they remain for future generations. It was due to the kindness of the Venerable Dordzong Rinpoche that a great number of texts and treatises and commentaries could be practiced. It is due to the kindness of Tugu Choja Rinpoche that the tradition of the various sacred paintings, particularly of the Drukpa lineage, are being maintained. It is Chogyön Rinpoche's kindness that the various practices and associated materials of the various protector practices, which are particular to the Drukpa lineage, have been maintained and have been made available again, have been republished again. And it fell to Sato Rinpoche himself to take care of the vast collection of mandalas, which are particular to the Drukpa lineage, to republish these. All of that would not have been possible without the kindness of Adi Rinpoche. Adi Rinpoche, even when he was here in Nepal, he spent about 2 years here before returning to Tibet. He was constantly immersed in the one or other project of committing rare texts, rare teachings that he had received into writing from his memory, and he was constantly busy with teaching and instructing younger masters and also ordinary students who came into his presence in order to uphold particularly the precious transmissions and teachings of the Drukpa lineage. Adi Rinpoche, as has been said, stayed for 2 years here. Then eventually his visa expired. It could unfortunately not be renewed, so he had to leave, and he went back to Tibet. He did indeed try to come again, but there were various obstacles on the various through the various governmental agencies on both sides. Therefore, it was unfortunately not possible for Adi Rinpoche to come here again. So he spent the rest of his days back in his native Nangchen.
Tani teka ya phamata tu tani Sonyi Rinpoche khongka khimpo ya zong nampa ya ro te khongna pe zure zude tani zutsa Sonyi Rinpoche ko pa jam tata pa jar sa tani cha ma Adi Rinpoche sal tangso je khongka ko ne je yizai so zaina ta lala ne chani re pa hido lala ne chowa koran yama thokte do de ngan de pesa de ngarang zure zo jala yore tan de yapore mane ta le zamane ni yungsam ro so khom sunje peche ma zeso.
Due to the necessity for Adi Rinpoche to leave, it was unfortunately at the time not possible to bring some of these publication projects to an end. There was still a whole lot of proofreading to be done. The sequence of certain rituals, etc., would have to be verified by Adi Rinpoche. So Tsogni Rinpoche then took it upon himself to do all of that work to the very best of his ability, and before going to publish all of that material, he then sent a whole set of proofs to Tibet, where Adi Rinpoche could then review them, where Sato Rinpoche himself also helped a lot with the reviewing of this material, where some mistakes that had crept into these texts could eventually be corrected, and in this way there was a whole lot of sending back and forth of material going on until whatever mistakes could be spotted could be eradicated.
Tani tekam ne ta Adi Rinpoche Sonyi Rinpoche le apun ta te ye par chando te ta te khayek te jaza ko sar ta tanam yama choga salin te kimbo nambe ha ko mendo te keman chotin do te da ke yabo yo samari ta leza ko sari kon song tani tekam ne Adi Rinpoche kon bhola yore ndana ya phat tho yo mare Sonyi Rinpoche ya phro shi song te yang mini pas tre ha mano tani Adi Rinpoche mana yo te Adi Rinpoche khong ge ta ndale go ndo ma to ta yung samare ndokwa ka ju yige cheglen da yabo yung go do ma se yung samare so tani ngal so ndo.
So the situation at the time was rather difficult. Adi Rinpoche could unfortunately not obtain a visa to come to Nepal again. Tsogni Rinpoche was faced with very similar difficulties and could not obtain a visa at the time to travel to Tibet to sort all of these difficulties out with Adi Rinpoche himself. So even though a lot of sending back and forth of material ensued, some things could not quite satisfactorily be resolved. There still remain to be some problems to be resolved along these lines, and it has now fallen to Sato Rinpoche to take the part of editing whatever is to be edited, of correcting whatever needs to be corrected, until we then have again at our disposal a fully complete and a fully correct set of all the various Drukpa Kagyu materials, Drukpa lineage rituals, practices, etc., which there are.
Tani Adi Rinpoche pe tukti nang te nga rang ke Tsogni Rinpoche le shu. Tsogni Rinpoche ta kare zitine ta le to samari nda yige te pe mangbo re pota jata che yo re te pa jab te pe mangbo ri song gormo mangbo ro song ta pe kale khabo re do song do. Tani yang Tsogni Rinpoche kong tusan tong do ta Drukpa Kagyu te mal kong le ka che le de yapo mare na yung sa mare ta churang ke tini che Adi Rinpoche lon le thap song ta yang char pa jab na pa jatu ti jimda ta nga zo ko song do. Tani yang ni Adi Rinpoche shu Adi Rinpoche kong pe ga song.
And when we're talking about all of this material, we're not talking just about a few books. The entirety of Drukpa lineage materials, rituals, practices, etc., and so forth, which have been published, make up the bulk of 101 volumes. So there is a rather large volume of material that was being published. And even after a lot of editing work, a lot of reviewing had been done, still there were quite a few mistakes here and there, but eventually through some oversights, the whole set got published. Adi Rinpoche was furnished with a set by Tsogni Rinpoche, who went to great pains to send it to Tibet and make sure that Adi Rinpoche really received it. And even then, still quite a lot of mistakes and unclear points could be found. In this way, one could say that quite a whole lot of money actually was wasted on publishing erroneous material. But again, never perturbed by these difficulties, Adi Rinpoche set again at correcting whatever he could find, sending proofs back and forth so that material could be further corrected. And it was then Sato Rinpoche himself who sponsored a further publication of now newly corrected materials. And Adi Rinpoche at the time was very pleased about that.
Tani ngala pamjor pesha to so chimo che yo mare te ta Drukpa Kagyu tim betonda re te ta nga ke chen kho le ho te le ma pe kha gormo mangbo go ho re te ni ko re te ta de di cha te ta Adi Rinpoche khong te sun le ko sa re te nga ke mena khang ba zu te ma mangbo le ka le ma te computer jam ma cho sa ro tani mini zu na lo ni la yang mini flat zu so te Adi Rinpoche go ni.
Now, having said that Sato Rinpoche himself sponsored the publication of a corrected set of all of these materials, does not mean to say that he is rich in any which way. But in order to preserve the precious heritage of the Drukpa lineage, what needs to be done now, doesn't it? In the course of all of this correction work, this being the 21st century, most of the editing work was done with computers, which are even being in use in various parts of Tibet nowadays. And whenever it was possible for Adi Rinpoche, during that period of time when this work was going on, he himself sat with the editors and he constantly looked over their shoulders. He made sure that no further mistakes crept into the material, and in this way he made sure that the next publication that was to be coming out would be of the greatest possible quality.
Tani te pesi tele ko ta pesha kan da ham do teni mani ko no te lo kable pe mangbon do tenga kable pe chong tani te ta pesha tenga ma jana zo pijin lan do ta na shome zo ra yang te lin dong liang zo to so la jimda na ro chi te khon le ke yang thun jer wa so pe sa de yang te zu ta chama drop ne aden mo chi kong rang ge ze thon ta pot ja ta chuksan re.
Eventually, in the course of this project, the money ran out, which particularly gave Sadhu Rinpoche a whole lot of headache. What to do now? There was no more money to proceed with the project. However, it was of extreme importance to do so, not to just let things be at that particular stage. So Sadhu Rinpoche himself took it upon himself then to travel to Beijing, where there are a couple of foundations, societies which support the publication of Tibetan materials, and he went to a great many different people to ask for grants, to ask for donations, to ask for support. He was successful to a certain extent and managed to get some support so the work can go on, and eventually when all of that material, that further corrected material will be published due to the kindness of Adi Rinpoche, who initiated the entire project, there will then eventually be 113 volumes of material in which is contained all the precious, transmissions, teachings, etc., and so forth, which are particular to the Drukpa lineage.
Tani dati pecha te tata chache jamna patsa yatsa kambrina na zi takta zuka yo ta nge khatsan choni mo che shu ta nanga ta nge le cha yo ta de pa ja ro chi ni shu yo te kong ke ta na pecha yo na ja ji so do te nam ja ha ko me.
So all of that has been entered into computers. It has repeatedly been edited, and parts of it have been published already, have been made available. Sadhu Rinpoche was fortunate enough to get together with Tsogni Rinpoche, who is the other significant part of this whole undertaking on this side of the border, so to speak. And together, this is their most important work. This is their the work which is closest and most important to their hearts, to eventually furnish us with a full set of fully corrected material, which will then eventually be published and which will then eventually be distributed.
Naro churo la sokwa ta tane ngake ta kaju te ngake ropa kaju ko drop gotse tinna ta meni chega me so hondo di ye tinna ni ta tendo na che do tun me so na ye cha che la do na nga son ropa kaju ko timba ta na ne thokko yo so hondo the chapsan ta na yo so.
This collection of materials will eventually be the most important collection, which contains all the relevant materials of the three major Drukpa lineages, which are namely the upper, the middle, and the lower Drukpa. So all of that material has been collected, has been cited, has been proofread, has been edited, and once it will be available, once it will be disseminated among all of those interested parties, it will furnish them with a complete set of all the particular traditions and lineages and transmissions which have since the olden days been transmitted particularly within the Drukpa lineage.
Ta te ye ko ne te ta jingku de ko la de jingku de Drukpa ka jo yon so te ko ne ge zen ta jingku kong pe ke ba de te jingku de yon so ta nge pa che som yap ma nge ta de thot song de ta pa ja tho ni yang cha jing go re pe sha la so pa te ja tho mi za le ta no thong cha re te pa ja tho mi ta za le ta te ni ta na nde go re te ta no thong mi.
Such a publication project on such a scale does not only entail the publication of written materials. It also includes the publication of all the various paintings and drawings which are relevant to the various cycles of practice, the various mandalas which are relevant to the various practices and empowerments, the various empowerment cards which are known as tsagli in Tibetan, which are used in the course of empowerment rituals. All of these have to be viewed, all of these have to be corrected if any mistakes in them should be found. Many of them which are not extant anymore have to be recreated on the basis of the various texts, etc. So this is a part of the project that has hardly even started so far, but that will be the next step of that vast publication project, to get also all of these materials together so that finally they can be disseminated in omnibus, so to speak, with all the written materials to present concerned parties with a fully complete set of all there is along the lines of the Drukpa lineage.
Chukson ta kare re den yang ma so Drukpa kaju ma chi lama tham che yang pecha ning ba nyau de yang ni ndo ya khasa be ta pot chukson jor ta jar chukson jor so.
One can easily see how these projects keep growing, how these collections keep getting bigger. As Rinpoche has mentioned before, the original publication consisted of 101 volumes. The further corrected and proofread publication now presently consists of 113 volumes, and a further publication in the future will very likely contain even more volumes, because as the collecting of rare and ancient, particularly Drukpa materials goes on, again, more and more material is being found with various masters, with various lamas all over the Tibetan parts of the country. Many come by themselves with some old text that has been in their possession for a long time, which has been deemed lost by the publishers, which will then be added to the next publication. So very likely the next set that comes out whenever will be even more voluminous than the presently extant one.
Jan Sonyan Muchi Japshu, Kimbo number, token number, Kunampa, Pushayo, the knee, Dan Tomate, the knee Gonha Sosola, the knee the Karchate, Semo Kong, the Shusha, Martejina, the Mount the Karchana and the Karendo, they run like Karen Kondo, Tinante Tajin Paya Boyore.
So for the time being, the index of these materials has recently been distributed among the various masters, among the various monasteries, and all of them have greatly rejoiced in being able to get their hands on that material. Just the publication of the index itself was a rather vast and a rather trying project, which for the time being has been completed, and we can hope for more such publication activities along these lines in the future.
Then I saw Drukpa Kajula, young Chachatan, the Yore, Nimake, Jinchintanzun Raurina, Pay Apondo, one long tree, Dama, Dita in the Mandoji Apondo, Nikon Shu, Devanati, Jangon Rojin Conquer, Tela Otate Apondo, then Nanda Yapori, some Tel Conquer Japjorin, some young Jam Como Pesha, Chacho Conquer, no so? Japesha.
Also, His Holiness the Jalwan Drukpa has so far greatly rejoiced in these activities, has greatly supported these activities, because in the end, all of that relevant Drukpa lineage material will be collected in a single coherent collection, such as the Nyingma teachings are collected in the Rinchen Terze that has been compiled by the great Jamgon Kongtrul. Eventually there will then also be such a collection of Drukpa materials. And as a sign of his great appreciation and of his undying support of this very worthy project, His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa has recently donated 30,000, I believe yuan is the currency in in China, 30,000 of whatever currency they have there, to the further publication of these materials.
Tukti Pachimo, Tandopa Kajitimba, the Yajeko, Mania Compa, Nyamba Sochu, Tinata Marin, Tayung Samari, Tene, Ya Jarang, Jamgona Bandana Yondo, Tene Yasu Punja, Mandogona Camorindo, that meaning around Sokaya, Rantop, Ramperzo, Ranang Sosokaya, Chile, Totagolri, so Tane Ademochita, Dopa Kajitimba, Tola Ademochipe, Kanga Chimboso, Tane Wang, Tree, Dama, Long, Ta. 다시 내는 수준 남이지 konkretan 세pan 춘내 장내 되는데 나좀 감 예난다 야다 자와 바이어 부다 참아 공완을 주바데 다다다 유저데 참아 konkreta 코네 토커잖아 랑 토커벨레리 마도 먹대 브로치 조마 대빈 다 코네게 독박까지 띵발다 메시지 좀 야오래.
One can without a doubt say that it is almost solely to the kindness of Adi Rinpoche that the precious teachings, the rare transmissions, the empowerments, instructions, explanations, reading transmissions and so forth of the glorious Drukpa lineage will continue and will flourish in their entirety. It is due to his effort of many years and due to his kindness only that this will indeed come to pass. Many were the times when Sato Rinpoche remembers that Adi Rinpoche was greatly worrying about this or that teaching or instruction getting lost, being forgotten. And great were the pains that he took upon himself to hunt down, so to speak, rare transmissions, almost forgotten teachings of the precious Drukpa lineage, just in order to eventually contain them in this vast collection, which will be the main collection of Drukpa Kagyu materials that will be made available to all those interested parties eventually.
Nene chondana ne sonso ngan nene kamna yude kongan pe nge po yama shiri pe mambo reso tene khongina pe ropa ka ji timbandal pe shajin pe chimo khongrin ya yen a yin da yin ta jamgon wa tene khongkete na hando ta kana na te chi ya ropa ka ji timbat je go gondo te na khongya adenom ba chi khona ba gomba chik tang che chona na cholu namji rindo.
Particularly when His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa had the opportunity to travel to eastern Tibet, to Nangchen, to meet Adi Rinpoche there, it was his express wish and his greatest concern that whatever there was in the way of particular Drukpa Kagyu transmissions, teachings, etc., that all of this be given to him, that all of this be passed on to him, so that he could become the next holder of these many rare traditions. And indeed it came to pass that like liquid is being poured from one vessel into the other, that Adi Rinpoche was able to pass many of these rare teachings and transmissions on to His Holiness, so that in this way His Holiness the Jalwang Drukpa is now the holder of also many rare teachings which heretofore he had not been able to receive, and he therefore now, having received these teachings and upholding them, he will make sure that they will remain within this world for the benefit of all of us.
tene Drukpa namba inandra ta anne tene Drava tang zuma tene jimda namba te kong namba dace ke tinanja tene ngaso Drukpa kaju timbandala dace ke simshokji devina ya ye je thomna tene pe yabo yongsare.
And therefore it is of course also His Holiness's concern, as he has pointed out several times already in the course of these last few days, that all of these materials, all of these teachings, etc., are being passed on to the present-day Drukpa Kagyu, Tukus, the monks, the nuns, all of those who practice within the Drukpa Kagyu lineage, that all of these teachings are being transmitted and upheld by all of these practitioners to the very best of their ability for the benefit of all.
Ta gompa yeng ma thole mangbo yore tane te yeng ma te mangbo la to te lala ne ta jinda ke dapo ja mangbo no te de ma ta ropun bu sa cha ne tuk namba ta rang so le ha yore te ne te la ma ta che ta na tren jinda namba mangbo sa re tane te la ko ni top ji yang rang so te nyumbo timba laksam yole tanda mangbo yujuri te ka ta tanda It
is indeed the case that much has been destroyed and much was in danger for a long time of being irretrievably lost, but slowly things are basically on the... Now I was thinking of something in German and I don't know how to say it in English. Let me rephrase it. We are basically picking ourselves up again. Even though there was a hard time in which the going was rather rough and difficult and much was in the danger of being lost, for the most part things are on the upswing again, so to speak. And even though the going is still rough and tough and not easy at all, it seems as if the majority of all of these various transmissions and traditions, particularly of the Drukpa lineage, can be saved into the next generation.
Tani chetang Bhutan, Jaga Payota, Tani te Traha Lama Tel Marlepe Chepar Chimundo. Ni Choa Yetaina, Bonina, Choa Pe Yabo Yomare, Ni Saja Zambasa, Nangayan Lana Zambasa, Doze Zambasa, Togoya Zambasa, Sansang Tuparona Tambore, Tatejanya, which you name living, Bo Mangia. For
the most part, the situation in Tibet and the situation in India and Nepal and other places where Tibetans have fled and re-established themselves is somewhat different. And it's somewhat more difficult in the Tibetan parts. Outer conditions are rather rough in Tibet. There is not much in the way of facilities. Even when it comes to food, there is not particularly much available. In the Tibetan areas, for the most part, is the tradition to have a little bit of tsampa in the morning, then sit down to do one's practice. One would then proceed to have a little bit of tsampa for lunch and sit down to do one's practice. And in the evening, if one would be very lucky, one would have a little bit of tsampa and add a little bit of soup to that. Now that would be a real treat, and one would then continue to do one's practice. In the Tibetan parts of this world, it is for the most part the tradition that many of the serious practitioners devote a whole lot of time of their lives, many years, to make a concerted effort in the way of practice, to practice in seclusion and solitary retreat in order to gain proficiency and insight and understanding by way of training themselves in these practices.
Koran sola jimdanda nyo yomare kanri zena saho longkore rokan tombo tene sacha tsupo moda yona lana yom mutapsa ta tuna janya re sundi tene jimdada raho lomare ten te chachin pe simbo ten sha cha gun ten reguna dana to so chupari ne rang yang to ba chupari do ta koran so kunjere ta nisa te che te ma to ta che yomare ten tuna janya de yore ten ta koran so chu ten ta sal jom do te na ta chu ngom 다 취 에리칼인데 야는 다 코란서 빼야고 낭 취대 다 코란서 빼야고도.
The practitioners in Tibet may not look like very much. They may live under very simple circumstances. They may not have much at all at their disposal. Some of them might not even have more than a single set of clothing which they wear on their bodies. So outwardly they may appear rough and gruff and dusty and may not be very impressive at all. But rest assured that many of these practitioners, if we were able to look into their insight, would turn out to be of the highest caliber, would turn out to be very great, very dedicated practitioners who truly have taken the Dharma to heart, who truly have made the practice of Dharma an integral part of their lives, and who therefore truly are able to demonstrate that they have truly undergone a beneficial transformation for the sake of all beings by way of practicing, studying, and training themselves in the Dharma. When a great number of these practitioners in Tibet come together, living under such rather simple circumstances, it is also the case that they have very little facilities at their disposal in terms of hygiene or anything. So often when people travel to Tibet, they will find an assembly of practitioners a rather smelly affair. But that being so, one should be reminded of the fact that even though outer conditions are rough and difficult for each and every one of these practitioners in Tibet, on the inside, many of them are of the very best sort, very advanced in their practice, and have truly taken the Dharma to heart. So when it comes to judging the quality of practice of the various types of people which are practicing the Dharma in the various parts of the world, one could still say that the best, the most dedicated, the most advanced are still being found in Tibet.
Churu gonna pull your saragos. Hang on, ya, Tachipo window, Nandanari, do not Pechipo and Sari. Churu gonna pull and dogusari, Pun Pechu, those, then you tell a cheaper Pechimo, doesn't do the tongue and the terrain, Tatane, Zuma, Gema, Kona Pape, Karazambori, Lama, Jangonapa, Dana, Yogore, then it should down Shusayore, Pecha Lapsayore, they take the Kona Pate, Gawagong. Goa, Suga, the Nita and the corner of that, Chazola, Ransos, Yamni, the Yabolina, you pay a boss, the Tangichinama, Yamni, Rochi, the Nank take him, and Drukpa the Drukpa Gom, Yamni, Tate, Jupato, pay a bola, Tita, that's it, Teabo, Nangichinambe, told the Eurochi, Jotania, Chusuata. Hale toda Chuta, Gino da Satravimando,
On the other hand, Rinpoche has had the opportunity to travel through India, to travel to Nepal, and he came across a great many of assemblies of practitioners in these parts. They look rather different from the Tibetan lot, so to speak. They're all dressed very nicely, they have clean robes, they carry themselves very nicely, they're obviously very well fed. Now Rinpoche says, of course, he lacks the ability to look on their inside to truly see how their practice has evolved or not. But he cannot help but notice the difference that there is a rather great emphasis in these parts on appearing in a nice way, on conducting or carrying oneself nicely so one is very nice to look at. Whereas the practitioners in Tibet, not having to worry about that because they have no such materials at their disposal to make themselves presentable, they rather more concentrate on what's really important, which is the practice of meditation, the practice of the Dharma, to truly internalize it and to truly bring about benefit for beings through their practice. So even though Rinpoche lacks the ability to truly judge practitioners outside of Tibet, he cannot help but see the rather great, rather obvious difference. Now, having said all of that, we should all remind ourselves that as Drukpas, calling ourselves Drukpa, followers of the Drukpa lineage, the single most important thing is to practice, to put into personal experience by way of training that which we have received in the way of instructions from our teachers. This is the single most important thing for someone who calls himself or herself, for that matter, for someone who wants to call him or herself a Drukpa practitioner. This is the single most important thing which is never to be forgotten. Now, having said all of that, obviously time has been passing on rather quickly, so I guess Rinpoche intends to say with that he wants to call it to a close rather soon.
That's it. Jarjo Koka song, Toka number in Tane, Zuma number, Ta, Kimbo number, Taha number, Ta, Jimda number, that's it, more she. Tani te dunga pe sambagati, Tani Maompane, Yang Telo Kong number, Yang, the Son the Tiny Ba, Chojin Sunda, Te dunga Kala, Yang Unica Tani, Revata, Yajar Jarjok, Te Revayo. David Chinamba, that's it, Majara Pardo, and it Tashi Delay, the need Serene, me, Lucan Zamboyon,
Having said all of that, Rinpoche also would like to express how much he rejoices in being able to be here, to meet all the great masters of the Drukpa lineage who have assembled here, to meet all the Kempos, the learned ones, to meet all the monks, the nuns, all of you practitioners who have come from all over the world simply for the purpose of joining this Drukpa Council. This fills Rinpoche with great happiness. It is a source of great rejoicing for him, and he hopes sincerely that he will be able to join the next Drukpa Council and to meet all of you again. Until then, Rinpoche says he sends you, he gives you all of his heartfelt greetings, blessings. He prays for your long and prosperous and successful lives, and hopes to meet again very soon. With that, Rinpoche said a heartfelt Tashi Delik.
Sunam de Adamje Zuba Tomni lui ci sono due molte poi ci dico cornoso
Tatarinde nge shuagi subject devotee chigi logi solashmashi yanching ransu chidang chue chebe nangshin che ni tawa gomba chebal sobegi rantinde kai mindu di subject